Rear naked choke is one of the most effective and feared moves in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. Originally known as headlock in judo, meaning naked choke. It has no uniform grip is needed. It works by cutting off blood flow to the brain. In an MMA fight, the attacker takes their opponent's back, slips one arm under the chin, and secures a figure 4 grip. This pressure on the carotid arteries can knock someone out in seconds. A prime UFC example is Khabib using a variant on Conor McGregor at UFC 229, proving how quickly it ends fights. Short choke is closely related to the rear naked choke, but uses a tighter, shallower grip. In judo, it's still within the realm of headlock variations, but MMA fighters apply it when they can't fully slide their forearm under the chin. Instead, they lock a palm-to-palm grip near the opponent's jaw or lower face. This can be a crushing neck crank as well as a blood choke. Khabib's finish over McGregor has been labeled both a face crank and a short choke. The guillotine is an iconic submission in MMA, with roots in catch wrestling and BJJ. It gets its name from how the attacker's arm wraps around the opponent's neck, much like a guillotine blade. To do it in a fight, you catch your opponent's head when they shoot for a takedown or duck too low, then crank upward. This cuts off airflow or blood flow in a flash. Cody McKenzie made headlines in the UFC with his McKenzie-tine, while Brian Ortega and Charles Oliveira are also feared for their lightning-fast guillotines. High-elbow guillotine, sometimes called the Marcellitine, from BJJ legend Marcelo Garcia. The high-elbow guillotine involves lifting the choking arm's elbow sharply toward the ceiling to prevent the opponent from peeling it off. In MMA, you'll see fighters lock it up when someone tries to wrestle them against the fence. Dustin Poirier has showcased this move in the UFC, catching opponents off guard with that brutal upward elbow pressure. The 10-fingered guillotine is a lesser-known variant that doesn't encircle the neck with the attacker's arm alone. Instead, both hands cup around the back of the opponent's head like a prayer, driving upward into the throat. You might see it when fighters sprawl on a sloppy takedown. Joe Duffy demonstrated a knack for tight front headlock chokes, including this 10-finger twist, during his UFC run, while not as common as the standard guillotine. Arm-in guillotine. In the arm-in guillotine, the opponent's arm is trapped alongside their neck, creating a slightly different angle of pressure. Although it can be a little harder to finish, it's also tougher for the opponent to escape. A famous UFC moment was Jon Jones using a standing arm-in guillotine on Lyoto Machida at UFC 140, with Machida's arm caught in the mix. With the added control of the arm, it's a powerful variation of the classic guillotine. The triangle choke is a cornerstone of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You form a triangle around your opponent's neck and one arm with your legs, cutting off blood flow. In MMA, this often happens from guard, but mounted and reverse triangles are advanced variations. Tony Ferguson used a classic triangle to submit Kevin Lee at UFC 216, and Nate Diaz famously snagged a triangle on Kurt Pellegrino, flexing mid-choke to celebrate early. It's a move everyone fears. Arm triangle choke, known as katakatame in judo. The arm triangle involves isolating an opponent's arm against their neck while your head and arms apply pressure from the side or mount. By tightening the space around the neck and shoulder, you squeeze the carotid arteries. Brock Lesnar famously pulled off an arm triangle on Shane Carwin at UFC 116, and Jon Jones has also shown mastery of this move from top control. Essentially, you're using their body against them to cut off blood flow, making it a tough submission to escape once locked in. The Anaconda Choke starts from a front headlock, with your arm threading under the opponent's neck and out their far armpit. You lock your hands, roll, and create a vise on the neck. It's a favorite among fighters with strong wrestling or scramble skills. Dustin Poirier has threatened it in tight battles, and Anthony Smith has secured finishes with the Anaconda in other promotions before showcasing his grappling in the UFC. Mastering this technique requires precise positioning and control, making it a sneaky yet highly effective weapon. The rarest choke, also called the Bravo choke, is a close cousin of the Anaconda, but threads under the near arm instead. It's a high-level front headlock attack that strangles opponents from odd angles. Tony Ferguson made the rarest his signature in the UFC, locking it in on opponents like Edson Barboza to claim some highlight reel submissions. A perfect showcase of its effectiveness was at UFC 256, when Charles Oliveira used it to submit Tony Ferguson and prove his elite submission skills. Ezekiel Choke, originally seen in Jiu-Jitsu, The Ezekiel is a forearm choke that can even be done without the guy if you're creative. Alexei Oleinik stunned the UFC world by finishing multiple opponents with it, even from bottom mount. That shocking scenario proves that if you have the grip and the squeeze, you can choke someone out no matter where you are. The key is using one arm to wrap around the head, while the other grips either the sleeve or your own forearm to apply pressure. North-south choke, lying chest to chest with your opponent flipped 180 degrees. Your head near their legs gives you the north-south position. From there, you slip an arm under their neck and lock your grip for a crush on the throat or carotid. Jeff Monson, an early UFC veteran, was known for this choke, and Thiago Tavares also used it effectively during his UFC career. What makes it so effective is the combination of controlling their body and using your weight to add pressure. Peruvian Necktie. The Peruvian necktie looks as flashy as it sounds. From a front headlock, you secure the opponent's neck and arm, then throw one or both legs over their back. As you extend your hips, the choke tightens. CB Dollaway landed a memorable one in the UFC, surprising everyone with its sudden dynamic finish. It's a high-risk move that demands perfect timing and precision, but when executed, it's one of the most dramatic submissions you can land. Flue Choke, originally showcased by Jason Von Flue. This choke capitalizes on an opponent who clings too long to a guillotine. You use your shoulder to press on their neck from side control. Ovince St. Preux mastered it in the UFC, earning multiple wins and the nickname Von Preux for his repeated success with this sneaky counter. By trapping their arm and driving your weight down, you cut off their blood flow, forcing them to tap out or go to sleep. Bulldog Choke, reminiscent of a schoolyard headlock. The Bulldog Choke traps the opponent's head sideways and wrenches their neck. Carlos Newton shocked Pat Miletich with a UFC 31, seizing the welterweight title and proving that old-school moves can still pack a punch if perfectly timed. It's an unconventional but highly effective choke, often executed when an opponent tries to escape back control. While rare in modern competition, when locked in correctly, it's nearly impossible to escape. Can opener, more a neck crank than a blood choke. The can opener involves pulling the opponent's head toward your chest while inside their guard. Mark Coleman used it back in his UFC and Pride days to force opponents to open their guard or faced excruciating neck pain. Finishes in modern UFC are rare, but it's still recognized as a legal technique. Though lacking the elegance of some other submissions, the pain it inflicts makes it a formidable move in any grappler's arsenal. Twister. This submission twists the fighter's torso in two directions, targeting the spine. It's derived from catch wrestling, but popularized in BJJ by Eddie Bravo. Chan Sung Jung, the Caribbean Zombie, hit the first twister in UFC history on Leonard Garcia, and Bryce Mitchell later became the second to pull it off, proving it's not just a freak occurrence. The torque it puts on the spine is unreal, requiring flexibility and control to finish. But if you can lock it up, a tap is almost guaranteed. The gogoplata places the fighter's shin across the opponent's throat, using the foot as a lever to lock it in. Nick Diaz pulled off a famous one in Pride FC, though not in the UFC, and while official UFC finishes are virtually non-existent, it has been attempted inside the octagon. It remains a high-level, flashy move that requires flexibility and impeccable timing. When done right, the pressure it puts on the trachea is immense, leading to a quick tap or nap for the recipient. Starfold Choke, derived from Judo's Kasakatane, or Scarfold. This choke pins the opponent's arm and neck under your torso. Fighters like Josh Barnett, who have catch wrestling and judo backgrounds, can apply significant pressure from this position, threatening either a choke or a face crank. By using your body weight to drive into the neck while trapping the arm, you leave the opponent few options but to submit. While not as common as some chokes, it's a solid tool for grapplers of all levels. Ninja Choke, somewhere between a guillotine and a darce. The Ninja Choke involves a front headlock grip that wedges the opponent's neck at a vicious angle. Chad Mendes and other wrestlers sometimes use this sneaky choke when an opponent tries to scramble. Its surprise factor makes it dangerous in transitions. What makes it special is the palm-to-palm grip around the neck, making it way harder for your opponent to escape. It's fast, explosive, and can catch them off guard in the middle of a scramble. Arm crush/arm crank. Not a classic jiu-jitsu choke, but the arm crush appears when a fighter uses the opponent's own trapped arm to press into their neck. Tony Ferguson and Charles Oliveira, known for creative submissions, have toyed with such moves. If you can trap the arm in just the right spot, It can become a quick tap or a nasty neck crank. The key is wedging the forearm into the neck while using your weight to amplify the pressure. While it requires precise timing, it's a powerful submission when locked in. Cross-collar choke, a staple in Jai-based BJJ. The cross-collar choke uses two opposing grips on the lapel. It's rarely seen in no-Jai UFC bouts, but high-level grapplers like Brian Ortega have the background to adapt its mechanics if the opportunity ever arises. Most times, though, we don't see the full version in the octagon, but it remains a powerful choke in jiu-jitsu competition, using the collar as leverage to apply immense pressure on the neck. Flue Choke, traditionally taught in JIT classes. The Flue Choke circles the neck with the fighter's arm and collar grip. In no-Gi MMA, some adjust by hooking the head or using wrist grips, but official UFC finishes are uncommon. Joe Lauzon or Charles Oliveira might break it out in scrambles, given their submission creativity. With its complex entry, it's more of a rarity in the cage, but still a move savvy grapplers keep in their back pocket for the right moment. Baseball bat choke, named for the grip that resembles holding a bat. This choke often needs a lapel for leverage. Grapplers like Renato Moicano might experiment with no-Gi adaptations, but pure baseball bat chokes rarely see official success in the UFC. Still, it's always in the grappling arsenal for surprise attacks. By gripping deep on the collar with one hand and controlling the head with the other, you can generate devastating pressure, making it a staple in submission-only competition. Paper cutter choke, also known as the bread cutter. This move uses the lapel grip from side control, slicing the opponent's neck like a paper guillotine. Demian Maia, a BJJ wizard, could theoretically pull it off in no-Gi form, but we get to see a definitive finish with it inside the UFC. Nevertheless, it's a staple of high-level jiu-jitsu, by threading the lapel across the neck and pulling the head down. Clock choke, a judo and BJJ classic. The clock choke targets a turtle opponent by gripping the collar in Jai and rotating around them like clock hands. Ronnie Yahya, known for his pure jiu-jitsu, has flirted with no-Gi variations in the UFC, but official finishes are scarce. Still, it's recognized by grapplers worldwide. With each rotation, the choke sinks deeper, leaving opponents little choice but to submit or go out. While tricky to finish, it's a technique all grapplers are aware of. Bottom mount Ezekiel. Only Alexei Oleinik has pulled off multiple Ezekiels from under mount in the UFC, a position most considered bad. It's an incredible show of grip, strength, and technique. If you ever see a fighter tapping while on top, it might just be this improbable submission at work. By threading his top arm around the neck and gripping his own sleeve, Oleinik has shocked fans and opponents alike with his unorthodox attack. Just goes to show how dangerous a choke can be from anywhere. Japanese necktie, a cousin to the Peruvian NDRs. The Japanese necktie cinches the neck and arm from a front headlock, but with a unique leg and hip configuration. Ben Saunders has discussed and attempted advanced necktie variations in the UFC. It's an intriguing offshoot for fighters who love front choke setups. By throwing the leg over the back and locking a figure 4 grip, you can compress the choke from multiple angles, making it a devastating move when mastered. Triangle, popularized by grappler Craig Jones. The triangle is essentially a modified triangle that adds shoulder pressure to induce more pain and faster tap-outs. Ryan Hall, a UFC featherweight and BJJ wizard, has explored these angles in his fights, though we haven't seen an official triangle finish yet. By adjusting the angle of the legs and pulling down on the head, it puts immense pressure on the neck and shoulder simultaneously. If it catches on in MMA, expect some highlight reel taps. Front naked choke, sometimes a term used for a modified guillotine without an arm in. Cain Velasquez used a version of it against Antonio Bigfoot Silva by stuffing the head and neck from the top. Though it looked like a high-pressure headlock, some labeled it a front naked choke because of how tightly it sealed the opponent's airway. Nomenclature aside, it showed how even a simple front headlock can be a fight-ending choke with the right leverage and power behind it. Pentagram choke, first made famous by Masakazu Imanari outside the UFC. This choke is a tangle of legs and arms that compress the neck. While no big UFC finishes exist, certain leg-lock-savvy fighters have studied and referenced the pentagram's tricky setup, showing there's always another creative choke lurking in the grappling world. By interweaving the limbs just right, it puts pressure on the neck from unexpected directions. An advanced move, to be sure, but one that keeps opponents guessing. Crucifix neck crank from the crucifix position, where you trap both of the opponent's arms with your legs and arms. You can twist the head to apply a neck crank. Frank Mark threatened moves like this during his UFC career, demonstrating that once a crucifix is locked, a fighter can attack the neck just as easily as the arms. With the opponent's limbs immobilized, it's open season for the neck. It's a crushing crank that can force a tap in short order. Calf slicer. While not a traditional choke, the calf slicer can be just as devastating. This leg lock attacks the calf and knee, causing excruciating pain that can force an opponent to tap. Charles Oliveira, known for his unorthodox submissions, has successfully used this technique in the UFC. By trapping the leg and applying precise pressure, the calf slicer can end a fight in seconds, even if it doesn't target the neck directly. The omoplata is another submission that, while not a pure choke, can still attack the neck. This shoulder lock involves trapping an opponent's arm with the legs, then using the whole body to crank on the shoulder and neck. Nate Diaz, always a creative grappler, has found success with this technique in the UFC. When fully locked in, the omoplata can cause serious pain and potentially cut off blood flow, forcing a quick tap. The neck scissor is a rarely seen but highly effective choke. By trapping the neck between the legs and squeezing, a fighter can quickly cut off blood flow. Ryo Chonen memorably used this technique in Pride FC, showing that it can work at the highest levels of competition. While risky to attempt, the neck scissor is a powerful weapon for any fighter with the flexibility and technique to pull it off. Mounted gogoplata. If the standard gogoplata isn't challenging enough, try applying it from mount. This advanced variation is rarely seen, even in high-level grappling competitions. The mounted gogoplata requires incredible flexibility and control to maintain the choke while keeping an opponent trapped in mount. While few have attempted this in MMA, it remains a theoretical possibility for the most creative and daring grapplers. The arm triangle is a staple choke from mount and side control. But innovative grapplers have found ways to lock it in even from back control. By trapping an arm and cutting off the carotid artery, a fighter can force a submission with tight pressure. While not as common as arm triangles from other positions, this variation showcases the depth and adaptability of high-level grappling in MMA. The bicep slicer is another unorthodox submission that, while focused on the arm, can also compress the neck. By using the legs to trap and crank on the bicep and shoulder, a grappler can cause serious pain and potentially impede blood flow. Like the omoplata, this technique is more common in pure grappling competitions, but could be a secret weapon for MMA fighters with the right skill set.